Today is August the 13th, 2008. My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm with the Oklahoma State University Library, and we're conducting an oral history project called Centennial Farm Families. And we're here with Darrell Stiles and Nancy Stiles Chipukites. Chipukites. Say it again so it'll be good on tape. Chipukites?
Right.
Okay. And we're in Cushing, Oklahoma on the farm. So thank you for having us today.
Thank you.
And Juliana Nicolasian may chime in once or twice with questions as we go along too, so we'll introduce her as well. Okay, so let's start by having you tell a little bit about how this land came to be in your family.
Well, the original homestead was homesteaded in the run of 1889, and my great-grandparents made the run. And just like everybody else that made the run, I'm not sure whether there was any ahead of the wagon or not, but I remember the story of the wagon when they crossed the creek going to the homestead. It's when my grandmother was bounced out and lost a child whenever they crossed the creek. I think it was the creek, Cabin Creek, which is runs right through the property as it is today.
And that was 1890.
89.
I think it was 1891.
Oh, instead of 89.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Uncle George corrected that here in his book.
Okay. And they had come from
Kansas.
And the name of the farm is Cabin Creek, is that correct?
Yeah, Cabin Creek Farms. That's been the name since they started, I guess, because they used to milk cows and peddle milk, and I've seen pictures of a wagon that had Cabin Creek Dairy on it, or Cabin Creek Farm. But it's been that way since they settled.
So the creek was probably named that at that time too then?
Yeah.
There were two major creeks in the Sac and Fox territory, and it was Big Creek that is west of here, and then Cabin Creek that the farm sits on. And so they named their farm when they did start dairying after the Cabin Creek.
Okay.
It's still on some maps. Sometimes you can see a map that'll have it on there, but at one time they had a sign up on 33, but it's not there any longer.
And how much acreage did they begin with?
160 acres.
Quarter.
And how much is left, is the whole amount?
Well, that whole place is still there, and then we own land all the way around that
Okay.
now.
Grandpa's, great-grandpa's brother was also in the run, Stephen Stiles, and he got the quarter section that was immediately east of the original home place.
Okay.
And then when great-grandpa passed away, Grandpa bought Stephen's place, and so now that's a part of our farm.
Quite a bit of acreage
Well,
then.
That had to change ownership one other time if that be the case.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Because when
There was
my
somebody else.
dad purchased that land, it was in what they call the Thompson Estate.
Yeah.
And so that makes us on a mile frontage on Highway 33 east of, well, a little bit east of the old home place.
Mm-hmm.
Full mile frontage there, and then Dad and Mother lived on the school quarter, just directly across the Stiles Road, west. And my sister bought it 2 or 3 years before she passed away. She propositioned the school land commission to sell it, and they did, and she got it bought. And then sometime probably back in late 50s, we were able to purchase the quarter to the north of the original home place, which was at that time owned by Lord Young. So that give us 3/4 in that section that we own, and then probably in the 60s,
The Duncan.
there was some property across Grandstaff Road, 292 acres or something, that my dad got purchased from a gentleman named Lloyd Eaton. And Lloyd Eaton's wife was a Duncan, and her dad was built and owned the Duncan Theater in Cushing. Built the Duncan Theater. But it was, at the time Hiram Duncan owned it, there was a big lake there, and they had a big board structure out over the water, and I heard Granddad say that people come from miles and miles around to dance on that floor out over that lake.
That was the
at night.
recreational spot.
And then the oil boom hit, and at that time they weren't taking real good care of their salt water. So it ran into the lake, made Hiram Duncan mad. He blew the dam with dynamite, let all the water into Cimarron, and he got sued for turning salt water into Cimarron. So the property was gully washed real bad, and when Dad bought it, why, we brought in dozers to slope the bank and filled it in, and did a lot of conservation practices, and so it's added to the farm. And then Uncle George that Nancy speaks of owns some 80 acres of property, which is a mile west from Stiles Road, and then a mile north. There's an 80 down there that we've owned since the beginning, or whenever Uncle George bought it. I don't know when it was.
Quite a piece of land belongs to the Stiles, didn't they?
He's really our great uncle, but he was always just Uncle George.
Okay, so the first owner was George Sr.
Right.
And George Sr. had 4 or 5
He had 6 or 7 children, I believe. I'd have to go back and count. Uncle George was the oldest.
of that group. Okay.
Yes, he was about 13 years old when they made the run. There was a squatters camp up close to Stillwater, and a family by the name of Mansfield had developed that squatters camp for people who were coming over from Kansas and waiting for the land to be opened. And I think there were 4 or 5 families that were there. And then when they came down that morning in September that they opened up the land, and great-grandpa and his brother Steve on horseback crossed the Cimarron River. And the place they really wanted, because they had come over and looked around and determined what spot was their favorite, was the one that Lloyd Yount actually staked. He got there first. So great-grandpa went a little further south and got the 160 that Darrell's referring to. But there was someone already there, a Sooner. And it was in dispute for about 7 years before they actually gave the claim legitimately to great-grandpa. But his neighbors testified that he legally was the first one there. And so at the courthouse in Guthrie, they got the record straight.
Well, of those 5 or 6 children, did they all stay on the farm, or they dispersed?
Well, Uncle George, of course, went to OSU and graduated, and then he did doctoral work at Georgetown University.
I believe so, in Washington.
And he actually became a medical doctor, but he had interest in livestock too, so he did some early work with anaplasmosis with a Dr. Snow at OSU. And I remember him telling us about collecting horseflies off of a giant Holstein bull.
He had a serious back problem, he wanted to be a surgeon, but his back wouldn't allow him to stand. So that's whenever he decided to become a veterinarian. So he had 2 doctorate degrees, actually.
So he didn't live on this land as an adult then?
No. He came back to visit, and then our grandpa, Lee Ray Stiles, and his middle name is really Roy, but they got it wrong in the records. There was another Roy that was born, and I think it was the child right before Grandpa, and he passed away just a day or 2 after his birth. And he was buried. There used to be a hedge of cedar trees along Highway 33 on the home place, and he was buried there, but no one has ever been able to really find the grave. But no one really looked for it until the highway was widened and took out the cedar trees. And then there was a dispute and a lawsuit with the Highway State Department, the Oklahoma Department of Transportation, and Dad over damaging the grave. Unfortunately, my father lost. It was not a happy day. But Grandpa was the only one who stayed on the farm. And quite frankly, the rest of the brothers and sisters, we hardly ever saw or knew. Uncle George came back and he liked to fish. He liked to visit with his little brother. And he was the only one we ever really knew. One of the girls actually married an uncle on my mother's side. So we have double relatives, double cousins, and it's been kind of fun to get acquainted with them. They've come around and asked questions and wanted to see the home place and work on some genealogy. And so it's been fun knowing who they were.
So then your grandfather, and then your father, and then you or your children, do you anticipate they'll stay on the farm too, or some set of children
I
will?
think Darrell has a grandson who will. He has shown an interest in farming, and he's going to be a freshman in high school this next year. And he has told me that he plans to come back and farm. So I think it will continue. All of the land is in a family trust. So we think that that's the way it's going to be. And the school quarter that my sister bought, I intend to, it was left to me, and I intend to just deed it back to the farm. My brother doesn't know that.
You might want to scratch that when it comes.
No, that's all right. He needs to know it sometime.
All right.
Well, initially, what was their income source then? Dairy, you had mentioned earlier? Or?
Initially, they did work for other people. They worked for the Indians, and I thought that was kind of interesting.
Doing what? Do you know?
Clearing land. They would go over as far as Oochie Creek, which is east of Cushing, 2, 3, 4 miles perhaps. And the Indians were clearing the land there, the meadows. And Uncle George and his dad would go over there and with the mules or the team of horses, whatever they had to work with, and clear the land.
Well, then once they started this as the farm, how did they make their living?
Initially they grew some castor beans and cotton, and then it was in about 1921, I believe, that they started the dairy. And they milked up until either the 50s or the 60s, but they milked for a good long while.
Through the troubled 20s and the Depression in the 30s?
Yes. In his later years, Grandpa became deputy sheriff in Payne County. And earned, I think it said $125 a month or something like that.
Supplemental income.
Yes. And then after he started as deputy sheriff, that left Grandma to milk by herself. And she did. And their milk barn was added to the old original barn, the first barn on the homestead. And she had to carry milk, 50 yards at least, heavy buckets up to the milk house where she would strain it and cool it. So it was not an easy life, and it probably attributed to her early death.
And she had 4 children?
She had six children.
And then now what's the source of?
Well, my dad, who was the second oldest child of Lear Stiles Sr., he was in the Navy, and then he worked for Shell for just a year or two, and he really liked working for himself better than someone else, so he also became a dairy farmer. And he and Mom started dairying in January of 1946, and I remember that real well because that was the year I was born. So they talk about that a lot. So from the time Mom had 4 children, she milked cows. And they were both raised on a dairy farm. Mom milked cows since she was just a small child. And of course then Dad grew up on the dairy farm, and then they became dairy farmers, which is rare. Generally, if you're raised on a dairy farm and you work 24/7, you're just more than tired of it. But they both ran that dairy, and we milked on the school quarter, what we still call the school quarter, until 1970. And then Darrell moved back and helped, and they built a larger barn and dairy and started milking about 100 head.
New technology, I guess that's that too.
Yes.
So of the original buildings on the farmstead, how many are still standing? Which ones?
Well, most of them. The original log house, of course, is not there. And then a building that we always knew as the carriage house was also a house. And then the main house that they lived in is still standing. The carriage house is falling down.
Wagon house.
The wagon house. But the barn that was built, and in your history, Oklahoma historical application, it tells what year those were all built, and I can't remember exactly, but close to 100 years ago. Over 100 years ago now, because I did that, I think, in 94 or 95.
Wagon house served multiple purposes after they quit living in it. It was changed over to a granary back when they were still farming with horses and mules. It was converted to a granary, and it had a hallway, and you drove the wagons through and scooped the grain on either side as a granary. And then Grandpa had built chutes down to some hog pens, which were down below a rock wall. And it had storage area up in the loft, and also there was a cutout going up into the loft and in the top of the roof to have it block and tackle. And that's where they did all the butchering. They butcher calves, and he had always raised quite a few hogs, and they would butcher 6 or 8 hogs, 4 to 8 hogs in the fall. You know, that's the old saying, is turned off cool, believe it, go home butcher. Well, in the fall when it got cool, that's when they butchered. And I remember he had a great big galvanized barrel, and he'd build a fire under it, and he had a thermometer in it, and when the heat got right, why, that's when they dunked the hogs up and down to loosen the hair, and then they put them out on a trough, and we rubbed the hair off of them. And then after they were cut up, we got to put all that brown sugar and salt and stuff on the hams. And did they put them in the smokehouse?
I guess. I think
Anyway,
I was
I'm
too
telling
little.
you-
I don't remember.
I'm telling you,
that.
that's when ham was good back in those days.
It sounds good.
It wasn't filled with water or anything like that. It was good.
At least left in a true smokehouse.
But after that, why they'd take them down to the cellar, and you'd hang them up down there till an even one. It was always relatively cool in the cellar, and they worked quite well.
Did they keep their canned goods in the cellar as well? So they were pretty self-sufficient from the farm?
And it was built right on the west end of the house, and it was laid up in sand rock on the inside and covered with dirt. So it was sort of a natural device, and you could walk through the back of the house to a kind of a vestibule type thing, and then right down into the cellar.
And when Grandma and Grandpa got married and lived in the house, great grandma and grandpa lived in the cellar. And they did all of their cooking. They didn't cook together. They did their cooking and everything down in the cellar. And it was kind of a unique design, and it had running water down there, and they would put the milk there to cool that they brought in to drink. So.
Most of the drinking water came from a cistern. The house had eaves troughs that come around to one given point, and the water went down into a cistern that had a layer of charcoal in it. And the water all went through this charcoal and then down into a storage device underground. And that was probably 8 or 10 feet from the back door of the house. One back door. It had two. And you could go out the cistern and pump you up some water.
Where did the two back doors go to what rooms?
Well, one of them
Went
went outside, and one of them went to a porch area. The one on the north went out to a porch area where they come in and undress or whatever they did back there. And the other one went directly out to the cistern.
Were the materials that they used to build the places come from the farm itself, or did they?
Well, originally, the log house and those kinds of things, log cabin and the cellar, but I don't
The other house,
know.
as I remember them telling it, they hauled the lumber from Guthrie because that was the main source. A lot of them in those days hauled their lumber in here from Guthrie, which was about, 40 miles.
Is it one of those trips that Uncle George met up with the Daltons that gave them a ride?
I don't remember that story.
He told about that, but I don't know if it was hauling the house materials back or just another trip, but he gave them a ride one time in his wagon. The Dalton brothers.
Well, were household chores divided between the genders, or was it you pitch in and do what needed to be done, whoever happened to be there?
I think probably everyone had to help and do their share. And of course, Uncle George probably got the most of them because he was the oldest. Grandpa was the baby, but he grew into him because as the others left and got older or got married, he was pretty much left there to do it.
I'm sure that that's the way it went because everything went that way in those days. Mm-hmm. Even when our dad and our aunts and uncles on that side of the family were growing up, well, the other side too, as far as that's concerned, they all worked, they all pulled their share. Because the boys, I remember when I was just about old enough to remember, like 4, they were still farming with horses and mules, and they would start early in the morning and give the horses a break during the heat of the day, particularly in the summertime. Put them back in the barn, feed them, and then they'd go back out in the evenings and when it cooled off a little bit and farm some more. And I remember them going to do that because they had some that acted a little bronky, and we actually went over there with saddle horses. My youngest uncle was only 4 months older than I was, and we spent lots of time together, lots of time on horseback. And we go over there with the saddle horse, put a twitch on some of them animals so they could get them hooked up to go to work, especially if it was breaking a new one. Why, that would be the routine. Twitched them to get them hooked up, and then they were between older horses that were broke and had experience, so they could control them most of the time. Dean had to run away with her hair one day, but so I was young, but I can remember a lot of those things, and even the old thrashing crews and stuff like that was done by horses.
Well, did they belong to a ring, like what, a threshing ring where all the neighbors around would come do your lot and you'd go help them?
Yeah, that was alive and well clear up after we had tractors, because when they was fading out the horses, the first tractor we had was about 46 that my dad actually owned, 46 or 47, 46 I think. And we pulled the same wagon that we used to pull with horses, only they changed the tongue and made it shorter and put a hitch on it so it would pull behind the tractor. And we pulled bundle wagons with tractors. But the thrashing crew would be all the neighbors, and the guy that owned the separator or the thrashing machine, it was called both things. Some of them called it a separator. They would take turns going from farm to farm, and when you went to do the next guy, well, you automatically took your bundle wagon and your helper and went out and gathered bundles and hauled them back to the machine.
Did they do this 7 days a week, or did they take Sunday off?
I imagine they took Sunday off. I don't remember that part, but that was kind of a sacred deal back in those days. That they probably didn't work too much on Sunday.
Well, when you had time for fun, what would you do?
Well, this youngest uncle and I used to spend all our time on horseback and riding here, riding there. Our first job on the thrashing crew was carrying water, and they would have those old canvas bags or a gallon jug wrapped in burlap, and you wet your bag, and that helped make it cool. We very seldom had any ice to put in it, but we carried water from one bundle wagon to the next, because you'd have at least two guys, one pitching the bundles up on the wagon and one guy on the wagon stacking and driving the team to the next. Called them shocks. And they shocked all the grain and put them up so many bundles in a teepee shape, and they did that as soon as they got them put in bundles, and then they would shed more water and wouldn't stand it out or lay it out on the ground to rot in case it rained and everything. That was our first jobs, and then I probably shouldn't reveal some of the other things we did.
Oh, you're welcome to.
I'd have to edit those out.
We always rode the horses too hard. We'd come in and they'd stick their head halfway down the water tank to get a drink, which would scare some people to death nowadays because you kill one or something, but we never did. And when we was got up to around probably 10 or 12, we used to go out where nobody could see us and practice our Pony Express mount. That got me in big trouble because a Pony Express mount, you got to get your horse to running. Then you bounce on the ground and up into the saddle. And my dad goes out to get on the horse and he takes off. And he don't know what's wrong with this horse, why he started doing that. So probably somebody confessed, but we got in trouble over that. We also used to go get green persimmons and play cowboys and Indians, throwing them at each other. And we were told not to do that. We'd poke out somebody's eye. That's what they always said. Sure enough, one night I hit Donnie in the eye, and we stayed and stayed and stayed out in the woods till his eye quit watering. And I was scared to death that I'd really hurt him, but finally it quit watering, and we went back to the house. I don't think we got in big trouble over that, but we used to have a lot of mud fights, and we had a bunch of big ditches up there that had clay in them, and we'd make mud balls and throw them at each other, and we did a lot of stuff like that. Swim in them same old dirty holes.
We used to swim in terraces, and when I can remember us actually playing together, we had made a covered wagon with our pull wagon, and the dogs were hooked up to pull it. We had several dogs, and the dogs ran away and got in the terrace, and Mom had just changed our clothes and gone to the laundromat. She had to take the laundry into town because she didn't have a washer at home. And we all got in big trouble, all four of us, because we'd gotten muddy, gotten our clean clothes all muddy. We had to get the dog out of the terrace, we told her. Yeah. They went in there and just stayed. And we did used to play softball. They wouldn't let me play because they said I was too little. So I always got to run after the ball. And that was in the back lot on Grandpa's.
We'd have field hockey every morning before we caught the bus too. We had an old tin can. If you hit it with a club, sooner or later it'd wind up in a little old ball. And we had clubs up there, and we'd play hockey with that ball in that can before we caught the bus.
And what was winters like?
Seems like they were worse than they are
They were,
nowadays.
yeah, it seemed like we were always
had-
cold.
In 40 something, we had a huge snow. And these same big old ditches that we played in were just absolutely blown full of snow. When you try to drive cows in or something across them, why, you'd go clear down to your waist in those ditches.
Drop off in there and
And
lose
then
yourself.
we had, when our folks first started milking, what happened? We had to drive the cows down to Grandpa's
Oh,
and used his barn.
I don't
But I
remember
remember
that.
it was cold. Then we had other times we had a big old ice storm on top of the snow. And you couldn't walk anywhere. We wound up tying burlap sacks on our feet so that we could get a little traction to get around. And everything broke down when it was cold, just about like it is now. You get the most miserable day, that's when everything breaks down.
What was Christmas holiday like? Did you do anything special for that? Not then?
No, our tradition back in those days, we'd always go to Grandpa's on Christmas Eve, and then back over to our house, and that's when Santa Claus had already been there, so after we moved down to Grandpa's. And after we quit doing that, why, we had basically the same thing, and have for years and years and years at our folks' house. And somewhere back in years ago, the tradition got to be that we'd have calf rice. We'd worked all the calves back in October probably. And so then we had sister was lost, and she'd be the chief cook.
So the favorite room in the house was probably the kitchen.
Probably.
Well, at times, I don't think we ever went hungry. We didn't eat lavish food. It was mostly potatoes and gravy and chicken and beef. But in those days, you made a happy plate before you got up and left.
Mm-hmm.
And that would cause some turmoil once in a while.
You had to clean your plate, in other words.
That's right. You better learn how much you can consume, because you're fixing to stay there till you ate it, I'm telling you.
I thought it was interesting. Bob said that probably the kitchen was the favorite room in the house.
Well,
And I remember that's where we took our baths on Saturday night. And
No, we did it out on the porch
well,
after you
yeah.
was born.
Okay. I remember taking a bath in the kitchen. When did we ever do that? Mom bring that wash tub. It was an oval-shaped wash tub.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah, and I always got to be the first. I don't know, I was probably the dirtiest, but I got to be the first. And we all bathed in the same water there in the kitchen in that oval tub, tin tub.
Just kept adding a little hot water.
How often? What?
Oh, once a week.
Once a week.
Saturday night.
And the creek, was there creeks around where you could go dip if you needed to in between?
In the summer, probably.
Yeah, we did that.
We'd go look to the terrace, or
That terrace was so muddy, it'd make you dirty. I'm telling you, it was bad.
to the pond.
Or was the terrace something where you grew stuff normally, or was it just?
No.
Yeah,
We're not
Yes.
talking about a terrace like out on your house. We're talking about an
For-
earthen device that's built to divert water or hold water or to turn water
For conservation.
for
Okay.
conservation purposes. And in those big gullies that we had, when they built those terraces, we had a lot of little bitty ponds.
It would hold
When the
water.
terrace was built, it dammed up the water in those big gullies, and that's where we was snaking off to go swimming.
And she had to go into town to do her laundry, you said?
Yes.
Yep.
We did not have running water at our house until, well, after I remember, so sometime in the late 40s. But we couldn't use it for house purposes. Kitchen, a little bit. Bathroom, no. Laundry, no, because it was needed for the dairy operation. We had to save it for that. And it was a well, so we wanted to be sure that it produced enough water to operate the dairy.
Yeah, at that time, we only had probably 30 or 40 gallon tank down there with a jet pump down in the well, and then later on we put in a huge storage tank. And the jet pump, when the water level get up so high, the pump would kick on and pump it into the storage tank. So most of the time we had plenty of water if you were careful. And so then we got to have running water. And most of the time it worked out fine.
And what about ice then later? Did you have ice plants that you go get?
There was an ice plant in Cushing that we could get block ice, and we would do that once in a while.
Well, our grandmother on the other side lived in town, and they actually delivered to her house. The iceman would come to her house, and that's how they cooled food, was them old ice boxes. And you would put your big blocks of ice in them boxes, and they had some insulation in them, and they were made out of wood, and they had doors, and you put a big block of ice in there, and then that's where you started keeping your perishable items in those old ice boxes.
Well, how was the farmhouse heated? Fireplace?
Wood stove.
Wood stove. They had a wood stove in the main part, and then great grandma and grandpa in the cellar had a wood stove. They had a fireplace built in, actually, down in the cellar.
How many bedrooms?
Oh, there were 3 upstairs and 1 downstairs, I believe. I had 4.
Yeah, 'cause later on, Mary was on the north, Donnie was on the west, and great-grandma lived to be 99.
9.
And she lived in the southeast bedroom. And I remember they used to have a stovepipe, had an opening. I guess it was a stovepipe at one day. But anyway, there was an opening about yay big around from her bedroom down into the front room of the house.
And the heat.
And that's how she got her heat, I guess, it was up through that hole.
So 4 generations under one roof for a while then? If you had great-grandma, grandma,
And their children. At least 3.
At least three.
3. Yeah. She was blind in her later years, but she would still sit on the swing on the front porch, and someone would go and get the garden produce. And peas particularly, and green beans, she would sit in the swing and snap. And she, with her fingers, could feel if there were any wormholes, or when she had the pea shell, the vines off, so she could open those up and get the peas out. And Mom still talks about her sitting there and the things that she would sing. And we have a record somewhere of her with some of her old songs. So, yeah, but we need to pull that out sometime. Be sure that we save that.
She had a famous quote.
Oh, I think I know what you're going to do.
Shall we tell them the famous
Oh, might
quote?
as well.
She always told us boys, wherever you be, let your winds go free. It was holding one that run me.
And she believed in doing just that. Mom's told me that story before. So
She was quite a lady.
she was. She was
And
indeed.
that child that she lost when they crossed the creek was buried up there at the home place. There used to be a long cedar hedge that was,
I think that's Roy. I think that was the other one. Frank, I think, is the one that she lost.
I don't know which one she lost.
But she lost.
I didn't say,
She lost 2.
Anyway, she lost one crossing when they was moving to their new homestead. And so they buried him up in that hedge, and it was about, it was close to 100 yards long. And when they redid 33 a few years ago, 10 years ago or so,
At least widened.
why, they took all that hedge out, had to take it out, moved it, widen it right away. So that's just a little more history, but they had it marked with a rock. When Donnie and I was little, we knew where it was, and we'd go to it and find the rock ever so often to see if it was still there and still in place. Next question.
next question.
You don't want to tell them the rest of the story?
No, I'll get angry.
Oh.
What did the women quilt?
I'm sure they probably
They did later on for sure. Our grandmother on the other side was a huge quilter.
Huh, I remember Mom's mother quilting, but I don't remember the Stiles women quilting.
The other side used to have regular quilting meetings and go to the church and quilt on a certain day.
Great-grandma, Alice Stiles, started the first Sunday school, and she was very interested in music, and she got the music program going in the church. And when they first came here, they started and attended the Big Creek Church of the Brethren. And then later, for some reason, they became went to the first Christian church. But we've never heard the story of
Why they switched?
why they switched. It could have something to do that the Church of the Brethren and the Brethren Church, there are two different ones. The Brethren Church believed in Sunday school, and the Church of the Brethren didn't think we needed to have Sunday school. And since Grandma Stiles was so interested in Sunday school, that may have caused her to split and go to the Christian church. But that's just my thought on it.
But then later on, the Church of the Brethren started doing Sunday school.
Oh yeah,
too,
they've always thought that it was
as long as we
important.
know.
So I don't know.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about your schooling, then your early years of like elementary school, where how far did you have to go and walk uphill, downhill, all that, what they say.
Well, Darrell started, and Janice went to 1 year at Cottonwood. She never did go to Cottonwood.
By that time,
Cottonwood was a one-room schoolhouse.
by that time it'd been 1945, and I got to go start school when I was 5. And we had moved, maybe Nancy told you this when I was on the phone, but we had moved from the top of the hill west of the place. After Dad come back from the service, he bought an old house over here a mile west on the old Mandeville place and moved it to this school quarter that he had leased and did a little bit of fixing up, and we lived in that after we moved from the top of the hill. And the house on the top of the hill, we moved down to that place and used it for a hay barn. We moved a shed on it and used it for hay storage and mostly a bull shed in our show calves. We would fit them over there. And of course it's deteriorated over the years, and Chip and Nancy burned the leftovers a few weeks ago. But there was a one-room schoolhouse over here called Cottonwood, which is a mile and a half where the crow flies from, or more, probably 2 miles from where we lived. And the first teacher was a native by the name of Leva Lou Grant. She lived in Cushing and had an automobile, and she stopped at our house on her way to Cottonwood, from Cushing over here to Cottonwood over here, and picked me up and took me to school. And I had different avenues of getting home. I don't even remember for sure how I got home most of the time, but I do know that most of the neighbor kids over there walked, because a lot of times after school we would walk to their house. Holdereeds and the Tuckers were right down the road from the school. In fact, it was built on the Tucker place, and she was a sister. Leva Lou Grant was a sister to Glenn Tucker, who lived on that quarter, same quarter where the school was. But we had all 8 grades there, and all the Holdereed kids and Tucker kids and some others that I don't remember. Ivies, there was a boy there named Sonny Ivy. And then after that 1 year, they voted to consolidate with Hillside. And Hillside was an elementary school over here on North Kings Highway, which is from our house, was about 2 miles the other way.
Three and a half.
3.5. And we started riding school bus, and that's school buses, and that's where all the rest of us. I finished there and went through the 8th grade, and then all the rest of them went to school there too.
And I was the last one of our family to graduate from the 8th grade at Hillside, and none of us through those 8 years had missed a day of school. So they gave Mom and Dad a plaque for the family having perfect attendance, 5,000 and some odd days. which, is pretty unheard of.
They didn't get sick very often then, did you?
We would manage to get sick on a Friday afternoon or early enough, or sometime of that day, that we still got to count it as a full day of school. And then we were ready to go either the next morning or by Monday morning, so we never got counted absent.
So in school, were you in 4-H or FFA or both?
4-H in grade school, and then in those days they weren't allowing girls in FFA yet, so Nancy went through all the way in 4-H, and
Janice.
but Shorty and I, when we left grade school, then when we went to transfer to Cushing High School, then we got into FFA, and I wanted to play football and do sports, even though I was so little. But Dad kind of said, you decide one or the other, either your FFA stuff or sports. But I really don't think he'd ever let me play sports anyway. But then when Shorty come along, he got to wrestle. He had wrestled in high school and was quite good.
Dad had.
But they'd quit the wrestling program for a good many years, and then they started again when Shorty was a freshman or sophomore in high school, and so then he got to wrestle. But I didn't do any sports in high school. It's just FFA stuff.
So
And it was real difficult for us to participate, even though we were 2 miles out of town. But we didn't have our own car, and you always had practice after school. It wasn't during the school time. And we rode the bus, so we had to catch the bus to get back home, or we didn't have a way to get back home because of the dairy. Mom and Dad couldn't just drop everything and come and get us, and they didn't have a car, and it was then counting on a neighbor or someone to bring us, and it just wasn't feasible for us to
When
participate
Dad
in
wrestled,
anything like
they
that.
were still riding horses and stuff to school. And or I remember Dean drove a tractor to school part of the time. But we didn't have those luxuries.
Well, what was your specialty in 4-H?
We always had dairy cattle and showed dairy heifers, and then in FFA, I guess the specialty would have kind of been, for me anyway, was dairy judging, because we won the state contest my senior year, and we won a trip to Waterloo, Iowa, and that was a fantastic trip, because in those days all the cattle from all over the United States, the good ones, came to Waterloo, Iowa. They shipped them on boxcars, and they came to Waterloo, Iowa, and that's where they had the National Dairy Show. And then I made the college judging team, and we went back to Waterloo, Iowa, and went to the Hutchison contest. And at that time, you could do 3. And so over a year later, I tried out again and made it. We went to a contest in Chicago. So that was probably my claim to fame.
Well, you mentioned college. I'm assuming OSU, OAMC.
No, it changed my freshman year,
Somewhere about then, I guess.
58.
Yeah.
Isn't that the year we changed it? I remember reading in the old college all the hoopla about changing the name to Oklahoma State University, so I think it was my freshman year.
And you were on the judging team.
No, I didn't make it till my sophomore year.
Okay.
Then I was on my sophomore year, and or maybe my junior year. And then I think I skipped a year. I had to go an extra semester, so I think we went to a fall contest, something like that.
Well,
But they had all kind of articles and contests or something about writing the alma mater. They wanted to do that, and I can't remember that guy's name. But I remember him talking about that in the old collie and what they was gonna do and blah, blah, blah. That's when they wrote the new animal water.
Since we're talking about OSU a little bit, do you want to do a rundown of how many different members of the family have graduated or attended there?
Well, our great Uncle George was one of the first graduates. The first year they had graduates, I think there was a class of 8, maybe. And then his boys went to OSU, but our grandpa did not go to OSU, but our father did. So Uncle George, Grandpa's brother, our dad, us.
Well, our uncle Bob went, but
Yeah.
lacked a few hours graduating. Then Mary,
And
our aunt, and Don, our young uncle. So they had a several year lapse there, and then had 2 more children. Because the youngest boy was only 4 months older than I
It
was.
was called a second family. I don't know if they still refer to that, but one's born in later years or not.
But there was 4 of them that all of them went to college, but the oldest girl.
Okay.
But she had 2 children that graduated from OSU.
Mm-hmm.
So then, as Nancy said, it started on
Uncle George, Dad, all of us, all 4 of us, and your 3
my 3 kids.
girls,
Now the granddaughter.
and now the granddaughter
Is enrolled.
is going to OSU. And I have a son who attended there for a while, but ended up graduating in Texas, so stepson.
When the early ones went, how did they pay to go? I mean, how did they afford
They
tuition?
worked.
Was
Dad worked at the sheep barn, and I'm not sure about Uncle George, how he paid for his education. I'm sure he worked at something. I don't know that I've ever heard that story.
and did they live there or did they
Yeah,
commute?
yeah. They, of course, transportation was strictly horseback for the most part until Dad went. But he didn't have a vehicle to drive. I think Nancy said he hitchhiked back and forth to school, and then stayed over there and probably come home on the weekends. I don't know about that. But we weren't on tape when we told about how they survived food-wise, did we?
No, so you can say it again if you wish. It's fine.
They would be resourceful enough to go and to the milk barn and either take milk out of the tank or out of the can that it was stored in, or in some cases go milk the cows. And then I've heard him and Dr. Walters, who's the former meat scientist at OSU, lived together. I've heard them both tell that they had a lot of milk and crackers, and that's what they ate. And I don't have any idea what they got paid. But I know it wasn't very much, because when I worked for OSU in the 50s, late 50s, 59, I was probably 60. The going wage was 75 cents an hour. So it's probably, you can assume, quite a bit less than that. And I imagine they probably didn't even pay them. They probably let them stay in those barns, and my guess is they probably didn't even get paid. They just had their room there in the barn, but I don't know for sure how that worked.
May have had chores to do in exchange for getting to stay there.
Right. Yeah, they had to feed and take care of the animals and help show it. Alec McKenzie was a shepherd then, and he was a very famous shepherd all over the United States and judged a lot of shows and things. He was come over from Scotland.
Yeah, I think so.
But anyway,
somewhere.
the students that stayed there helped care for the sheep and even got to go on trips sometimes to show the sheep. They'd ship everything on boxcars in those days. And they'd go to places like Chicago and exhibit. I don't know whether they went to Kansas City or not, but I remember them talking about the International of Chicago. But they took steers and sheep and maybe even hogs, but they went boxcar.
And I think back then, Dad did a lot of work with the sheep, and he was excellent at blocking up a lamb for showing. Back then, you didn't cut all of their wool off. You didn't shear them to show them. You left the wool on, and you carded it, and you clipped it with hand clippers, and it was quite a masterful operation. I mean, they looked very nice. They were very square. Shorty and I showed Glenn, our brother, showed sheep in 4-H and FFA.
Well, I did too.
Did you?
Yeah.
He developed that skill also of blocking a sheep. Now they just take the shears to them, and the less wool they have on them, the better they like it. But back then it was a different story.
Did you go to county fairs back
Oh, yes.
and show, or just?
Yes.
Well, in the early days, we had a district fair here in Cushing. And we'd go to the district fair first, and then we'd go to the county fair in Stillwater. And we had an old, first vehicle I can remember hauling them in was a 47 Ford truck. And stock racks, of course, because stock trailers hadn't even been invented or thought about then. And if you had a vehicle, why, it was some kind of an old truck with a set of stock racks on it, and that's why we hauled everything. And we'd make 2 or 3 or 4 trips trying to get our animals over every time we hauled sheep. And then before I got out, I had hogs too, and showed sheep and hogs and dairy cattle. So it was an event for us, and the old saying was it always rained at fair time. And the fairgrounds in Stillwater was down there where Couch Park is now, in that area. There used to be a naval thing right west of there, and then it started the fairgrounds, and they had hog barn. Sheep barn was at that time in the north side of an old pavilion there. And
Where they had the horse pulling contest.
the old pavilion was dirty, and they always had a horse pulling contest, and it was
Dusty.
in there. And it'd get so dirty and foggy and dusty in there, you couldn't hardly sit in the stands and see the horses pulling it. The dirt was so bad. Then they built some buildings a little farther to the east. And they also had a horse barn and a racetrack. And they kept horses there year round and had a racetrack there. And that was right north of where the high school, north and a little bit west of where the high school football stadium was. All the fairgrounds was west of there, the buildings and stuff. And one time we were going to the fair, and before they redid 177 from the hill out south, they raised that a great deal, the highway level. But we got in town, the old truck flooded out, and the water was running in the doors into the floorboard. That's how deep the water was trying to get through that low part. Right in there where Kearns and them are now, their processing plant, that was the road in there, and then you turned and went up over the railroad tracks. But anyway, and we used to stay.
Okay.
The boys did at least. I don't
Yeah.
remember whether the girls did or not.
No, Mom and Dad wouldn't let us stay.
But
That wasn't the proper thing to do.
we'd always go with the animals, take our bedding and stay. And Dad had me get out to do something, I don't know what it was, and all that water. And all the bedding fell out because she had it all piled in the front of the truck, fell out in the water. But anyway, those were good days, and boy, you could have fun all night long. Till they drove around to see if you was going to bed or not, and caught you leaving the area, and then you was in trouble.
And how long would that last? About a week or just a few days?
Oh, 4 or 5 days, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was close to a week in those days.
And you were out of school, and of course, some of the teachers didn't like that. And some of them were okay with it because if you were a good student, you'd make up your work. But by the time you went to the district fair, our local fair in Cushing, the Payne County Fair at Stillwater, and then there was always a state show or two that you would go to if you had good animals. So you might be out of school for a month
Right in it, because
with your 4-H and FFA projects.
later on, we'd go to Sooner State.
Yeah.
That Enid, it was always held in Enid before they started having it in Stillwater.
That was usually in late summer.
Yeah, and it probably wouldn't take you out of school any, but then, like she said, when you started the other deal, if you went to Oklahoma City and Tulsa both, Tulsa gets over now, the first weekend in October finishes Tulsa. 5th, 6th, 7th, something like that of October. So if you went to these local shows and went to those two, you'd easily miss 3 to 4 weeks of school. And they, like she said, they didn't worry about it as much. There wasn't them laws on there like there is now. It was just you and your individual teachers and their attitudes toward it. But now, you know, they got them locked down to where kids can only miss so many days. And they probably don't learn near as much as we did because they have to go to school.
Real life lessons, huh?
Right.
We, speaking of 4-H, we all had a leader by the name of Mrs. Neoma Bateson, and she and her husband taught at Hillside. He was the 7th and 8th grade teacher and worked with the boys' basketball teams, and she taught the 3rd and 4th grades and worked with all of us enrolled in 4-H and taught girls basketball. And she helped us with our demonstration and speeches and everything. And to my knowledge, she is still living, and she is in Sapulpa, I think, in a nursing home. We've tried to find her, but we haven't had any luck the last few months. But she worked with each one of us 4 kids and was truly a family friend and probably helped us all far more than we'll ever realize.
Well, he did too. Because he always helping Donnie and I. We had a demonstration, a soil conservation demonstration that we won state with, and he helped us a lot with it. And then they even built our containers and stuff down there in the school shop. We had a school shop, and it was different in those days. Of course, we had Sunnyside, Hillside, Harmony, Happy Valley, and Deep Rock, and maybe Oak Grove. But anyway, them 5 schools was right here, close together in this community, in the surrounding areas of Cushing High School. And they all had 4-H programs. And back in those days, the principal and or somebody else in there was generally involved with the 4-H program and made them really strong. The Harmony principal name was Coleman Vaught. And he always had a deluxe poultry judging team. And Deep Rock was Lowell Bartow, but they all supported the 4-H program. So it's quite different today, you know, some of them don't even allow it in the school or don't offer it or don't encourage it. You have
If you have
leaders.
a mother or father that's interested, or someone else in the community who had a good experience with it, that is now who you see as the leader and not someone directly involved in the school as part of the administration.
Yeah, we had the 4-H meetings at the school, and the county extension people would come once a month to the 4-H meetings and might offer a program or some learning thing, and those were held in the school, at least in our school.
Did you attend the 4-H roundups at OSU?
Yeah. Donnie and I went with that demonstration one year. We stayed over on the east side of campus in our old dorm then, and you know them big flowers that grow on them, probably a tulip tree. Do they have a tulip tree?
No, they have magnolias.
Magnolia. Anyway, they had great big old bulbs on them. We picked one for football.
They're
We
pretty
got
hard
caught.
too. Yeah.
We got caught. And one of them security people just really give us a good butt chin for pulling that flower off of that tree. And there was hundreds on there. Hell, I didn't say you needed them all, but anyway, we got in trouble. But it was a good experience. They had another program where certain individuals would be selected, and you get to go, in those days, at Oklahoma City to the stock show. And I got selected for that once when I was just really young. Me and old Lee Walker lives down south in Stillwater. Got to go to that, and we were just really young.
They used to have fair schools. Was that going to the fair
Yeah,
school?
that's what it was. That's what it
Yeah.
was.
We used to, if you rated high enough with your projects or some other leadership achievement, you got to go to fair school. And they would have judging events and kind of self-improvement things at the fair schools, and improve our techniques of judging and, you know, whatever else you could think of that would help your 4-H career, I guess. But it was fun because you got to venture out away from home a little further, and that was always...
Well, that was before they started having it at the fairgrounds too. They had some big brick buildings down at the stockyards.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't go there.
When
I
we
always
went-
stayed on the fairgrounds.
When we went, they were still having it down on the stockyards, and they had some big brick buildings down there. I think they were east of the President Exchange building, where all the commission firms are at. So we got the run of the whole deal. You could walk over to the stockyards where they had all the cattle penned. You could go into the old commission firm building. I think they've changed it all obviously by now, and then back over there, and they had a dormitory that we stayed in. And then, of course, in those days they all had dormitories. Tulsa State Fairgrounds had a dormitory too, clear up to later 60s, because I stayed in it when I was in college. I got selected to go over and be an assistant superintendent, and they still had a dormitory then. I don't know when they got rid of their dormitory.
And if you did well enough with your 4-H projects, you could win trips to Chicago or Washington, D.C. And in those days, we would go by train to Chicago around Thanksgiving, and that was always fun. I don't know if Darrell ever got to do that.
Nope,
or not.
wasn't good enough, I guess.
Oh.
I'm not sure they did it back when I was.
They may not have started it until I was in there. But as a junior or senior, at least, I got to go to Chicago, and that was an exciting trip.
Without parents.
Yeah, there would be 3,000 or 4,000 kids from all over the United States, and It was quite an experience, and when you've been on the farm most of the time and not out too far away from your roots, that was pretty exciting.
What she's trying to say is it took you a while to learn how to act when you got off. I had a little problem with that once in a while. So.
You can elaborate if you wish or not.
Well, you definitely try a few things you didn't try close to home. I'm telling you that for sure.
Oh, no, I didn't.
I would think in this community, everybody knew everybody else, so.
And they knew what you
would
did.
get back home
Yes.
before you did.
You had several eyes watching.
You better not get a spanking at school either. I guarantee you it was pretty tough duty when you got home because you're probably gonna get another one.
Voice of experience.
Yes. Well, no, I never did. I never did get a spanking in grade school. I don't think I didn't get mine till I got in high school. But that was a rumor floating around. If you got one at school,
Sure.
you were told that you're going to get another when you get home. And there was ultimate respect for your teachers. No back talk, no sass. It just makes me sick. Some of the things I hear today about kids sassing their teachers, and the teachers were always right.
That's
You know,
right.
parents didn't go up there and raise Cain, and Johnny didn't do that. That didn't happen. It was ultimate respect for the
The
teachers.
parents defended and supported everything that the teachers said and did, and a lot different than what I hear today.
Well, is the Cottonwood building still standing?
No.
No, and
I have no idea
the
where
last
it
thing
is.
that left was the bell, but it's still in the neighborhood. It's over on the Tucker place, isn't it?
It may be. I think it is in the front.
They don't own it anymore, but I think it's out there in the front yard of the first house west of the old schoolhouse.
Well, back in the older days, how did you delineate where your property lines were? I mean, did you have fences or did you just?
Had fences since we've grown up.
Yeah, they were good fences. Some of the fences that are still on the place were probably built when they homesteaded. I've heard Dad say that they were some of the first fences.
Some of them look like it too.
I guess you ride the fences anymore, huh?
Well, we do
Check 'em out
on the
once in a
four-wheelers.
Okay.
But we have electric in so many places now because, well, in some places it just hasn't been taken care of over the years. It's been so hard to, get it sprayed and taken care of, and there's cedar trees and all kinds of things, and we're beginning to get more of it cleaned up, but just to make a path sometimes will take us a day or two to go down the fence, but we're trying to get electric on most of it.
Do you have hired help or is it just a family affair?
It's mostly us and a grandchild or two who we can talk into coming and helping us.
Well, has it been that way mostly over the years too? Had to be.
They had a hired man a lot back in the old days, not necessarily full time. One of them, we had a Native American guy that was pretty much full time, and then Granddad was a deputy sheriff for years, 16 years.
22, I think, or something like that, I read.
But he always knew people and knew somebody needed work or something, and then so a lot of times he'd have some hired help because he was off being a deputy. At least all the time when I was young, he was a deputy. So they had a hired man, and then this Native American guy actually lived out at the place, and then he lived a little bit with us, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
In the back room.
Mm-hmm.
So he started working for us some in the early days.
There was also a Negro family or African American, but they lived, I believe, in a log cabin And they helped with some of the farm
Yeah,
operation in the early
that'd have
days.
been James Simmons. He lived out north of Cushing, and I'm not sure he didn't live in a log house. I don't remember, but he was a really, really good worker, and he built a lot of fence. Helped build a lot of fence, and Dad had another guy that spent a lot of time helping us in building fence that lived north of Cushing too.
There used to be a cave on the old home place, and there was a man who lived in it for a while, and I think he helped great-grandpa some when they first homesteaded there.
Probably. That was before our times. When we were little and we were still putting up loose hay with horses and buck rakes and sulky rakes and those kind of things, and they throw it on the wagons with pitchforks. They had a man on the wagon stacking it so they could get the maximum load. And then the old barn that we'll see when we go up there, if we do, to take some pictures, had a huge door up in the loft. And they would let it down with a cable, and then there was a giant hook that come out of the top of the barn, went down to the wagon, and you opened it up all you could. And then with a team of horses out on the other end of the barn going that way, pulled it up, and went down a rail. When you got it where you wanted it, it had a pull rope. You pulled the rope and the hook opened and dropped it in there, and then you had a man in there to stack it in the barn. And that's where they put up the hay. And Donnie and I's job was to pull this cable back so the hook could come out. It had rope on it. We'd get a hold of that rope, tie it around the saddle horse and the horn, and pull it back, and you get it up here to the end. Well, then it dropped down on the wagon again, but you pulled it back with the saddle horse. They unhooked the cable from the team down on the other end, and it just drug itself back up. He'd drive the team up, hook back up. When they hollered, why, he'd take off, and that lifted the hay up in the barn.
Did they figure this system out, or did someone else?
Probably some foreigner figured it out. I don't know how they figured it out, but
They probably perfected as they went along.
So now do you do the round hay bales?
we do now. Yeah, we don't even own our own baler. We got
Custom.
family friend over there has baled our hay for several years.
Well, what's been the biggest plus, I guess, invention or something that has helped with your farming operation over the years?
Well, that's one of them, because
Yeah.
them square bales would kill you. I've hauled thousands and thousands of them in my time, and I couldn't do it anymore. So crawling in a truck and hauling round bales has certainly been an advantage over the old square ones. We still put up a few squares. We put up 250 this year to have some around for the sick, lame, and the lazy animals or stuff like
We
that.
get to take care of those.
And so we still put up a few squares and haul them in 100-degree heat. There's no future in that. But
Well, with the milking part, probably has been some.
well, we did square ones most of the time when we was milking. The last few years we had round bales.
When milking machines were invented, that was great, because Mom and Dad, and of course their parents, milked by hand. And they both, Mom and Dad, and their families delivered milk. They bottled milk and delivered milk in town. And Mom can still go by a house and tell you, oh, we used to drop milk off here, we dropped milk off there. Oh, so-and-so lived there, you know. But when the milking machines, we thought that was the greatest thing. And then the parlor and more automated system came along, and we built that in the 70s. And I was just out of school and starting my career, and Darrell came back, and he and his family got to milk mostly in the new barn.
Yeah, we started really getting after the milking business in 1953. Dad went to Wisconsin, him and several other people in the area, and they bought some dairy heifers up there and brought them home and calved them out, and that's when we got to milking in earnest. they'd been milking by hand prior to that. And I think that's the year we put in the surge milker buckets, wasn't it?
Probably, that would be about right.
But we had a 6-stanchion barn up there at the home place, our home place. And we 3 in and 3 out, 3 in and 3 out. And put in a pipeline and run it through the wall.
In a bulk tank.
And went into a bulk tank. Prior to that, it had been, well, we milked a while. I guess we milked a while with those buckets because I remember putting the strainer on top of 10-gallon cans and pouring it through the strainer and taking them cans in there. I wasn't big enough, but lifting them about yay high, a 10-gallon can, to get it down into those old coolers that had cold water running, and that's the way you stored it.
They were always really good to cool a watermelon, though. That was one of the greatest things. You never get a watermelon
summertime was
cold any other way.
Always had a watermelon in there.
Homemade ice cream.
That was big then,
Yeah.
really big. Everybody had a freezer, and that was a big deal. Like, they wasn't them little old dinky ones. They were 2.5-gallon freezers. They were big things.
And then we went from the cans, 10-gallon cans, and that cooler to a bulk tank. I remember that was quite an operation, getting that bulk tank down there in that milk house.
They'd tear out the ball and then put it back to get it down in there.
What was it, 500 gallon?
I think it was.
That is
A
a
lot of
large,
milk.
and that's a lot of milk. The
Man,
milk,
that first one might not been that big, but it seemed like maybe it was too. I don't know.
the milk truck would come, I think, every other day and pick up the milk, usually in the middle of the night, and take it for processing, usually in the city, Oklahoma City. So I don't know. Greatest invention was the milking machine for us, probably because of the dairy operation and refrigeration. And then, of course, water was a big plus, just to have running water for in the house.
Yeah, that's one reason why we, amongst other things, when we built the new dairy, we built it down here because the barn sits about that far off of a city water main. At that time, Cushing was getting their water from the city lake, and they had 3 lines that run from the city lake back over northwest here, right through our place. So it was kind of a no-brainer to build a dairy down there close to the water. And of course, we always had plenty of water. I think the closest line is only about 3 or 4 foot from the dairy barn. And then they, with the complaining over the years about the rollover and the stinky water, why Cushing's all went to wells. So we get it backwards now. We used to get it coming from the lake, now we get it from the wells back this way. My house is still on the city of Cushing water. Nancy and Chip are on the rural water.
And Mom's on rural
That
water.
that was another blessing for this community, was the Rural Water Corporation.
And Dad, well, it started with Big Creek rural water, didn't it?
Yeah.
And Dad was instrumental in getting that started, and served on the Lincoln County Rural Water District Board for a long time.
Well, until he died. He was
Yeah,
he was
until he
still
died.
on the board for the Rural Water District.
How many head of cattle are we talking about?
Well, when we were milking in the old barn with the 6 stanchions, we probably milked 50
30, 40, 50.
at the very most. And then when they built the new dairy barn, the parlor type,
We
had
averaged
100.
100 year round, twice a day. You knew where you was gonna be every day. It's just like being in a prison with no fences, because you're gonna be there.
And that was enough to keep the family afloat, or were there other sources of income besides the dairy?
that was
Is
it. Nobody ever worked outside the home. Mom was always a helper right along beside Dad, as Grandma Jane was with Grandpa. Grandpa worked outside the home, or outside the farm. until he became deputy sheriff. Let's see, and Dad worked for Shell for a little while, but that was only about a year or two. And
He
that
had a
was
chance.
before we started Darrell.
Shell moved a bunch of people out of Cushing, and he had a chance to move and stay with Shell and move up, but he elected not to do that. He didn't want to move. He wanted to stay here at the farm. So no telling, we might be living in Illinois or someplace.
He enjoyed farming and he enjoyed working for himself. And so the dairy operation was the sole income.
We did a little bit of custom work. We were one of the first people around here to have a silage cutter. And we had an old silage cutter that, well, we bought it new, but it pulled behind a little 47 Ford tractor and had a Wisconsin air-cooled engine on it, and it was a powerful dude. And we cut a lot of silage for a lot of people
We
around
got
here.
paid for that?
Oh, I'm sure he did some of it. Maybe, I don't know.
He
I
was
don't
always
know.
doing so many things for other people that I was surprised.
It may have been a trade out. They would, when it was like the thrashing, when we put up silage, they might come and help haul ours in, and then he'd trade out cutting theirs. Could have been a deal like that, I don't know for sure. But we run that thing all over this county, almost cutting silage in the early days. A little bit of combining.
For us kids to have money to spend or go to college, we had our 4-H projects and we earned premium money. Janice and I worked at the dairy hut in town. I don't know if the boys ever got to work for anybody away from the farm or not. I don't remember them doing
We
that.
might go help somebody, but I don't remember ever getting paid for an outside job. Mostly it was just helping at our place.
We had checking accounts and savings accounts, and we tried to put all of our money in the bank, and then we would have enough money to buy a project. Once in a while we'd have to take a loan at the bank. Then we earned enough money to pay it off, and when the project had to be sold, a cow, was no longer useful, or a sheep or a pig or whatever, then we would sell it and we could get that money. And that's usually how we saved our money, and that helped us go to college or scholarships. Or
1957, we were in a severe drought, and I had a sizable hog project. I had 90 head of hogs on feed.
90.
9-0, and the pond was going dry. We had a water line laid from that pond up west of the house down to the hog pen. Pond wouldn't run any water, so we was hauling water to those hogs. And the market went put 11 cents a pound. I lost a cool $1,000 on my hog project in my project record, but that's the thing with that hog project.
was that the summer that those 4 gilts died?
I don't remember whether that was, I think that was later when the 4 gilts died.
The heat was just so bad that they just laid down one summer day and died.
Well, we had a drip. We had a drip on that same deal.
And it stopped,
And,
I guess.
I didn't get it checked, and it mudded in or quit. I don't even remember for sure, but anyway, they ran out of water, and 4 beautiful gills died up there. Make you sick. Make you sick. Live and learn, Can't be too careful when you're raising them critters.
And water's important in it.
Yep.
At least you seem to have some trees for shade.
Yeah, we've always had plenty of trees. When they got the wildfires controlled, why, then we had all this brush and trees.
Now we have more than we need.
You said you did some terracing. What other types of conservation efforts did you?
Well, one of the first major projects was in this Thompson place that was over east of the old home place. It had been farmed in cotton and cotton and cotton and cotton. But the ground had basically washed away all the topsoil because it had lots of ditches and stuff like that. And when we bought it, why, they had the soil conservation people come out and shoot it, what they call, with the levels. And so we got a dozer in there and built some diversion ditches and got all that controlled. And then we've built several waterways and ponds. And the eating place, when we bought it after they blowed the dam, and it had gullies down in there that you could stand on top of a bulldozer down at the bottom and you couldn't even see the person. They were that big. We rebuilt the dam and then sloped all the gullies and put it to Bermuda grass. And it really looks quite nice now to what it did back in those days. And the place across from my road, it was the same farm had a 40-acre field that had a big old concrete, I think they called it a gasoline plant from the old days. And we dug a huge hole down there and broke it up, shoved it all in the hole and covered it back up. Got rid of it, and that made a really nice field out of it. It's only a 40-acre field, but it's a nice field. And various other projects. We built some silt dams to slow down the water. That same place where we replaced the huge dam, then we went down at the end of the property and built a silt dam, and it's got a drain pipe in it, and it slows down the water enough that it don't wash anymore. So that's a plus. We got some more we need to do. We got two places that need another dam built right now to slow erosion, but all those things are very, very expensive. Dozer work now is hundreds of dollars an hour when it used to be 30, 40, 50, 80. Now it's out of sight with fuel costs and everything, and repairs. So it takes a lot of money.
One of the things that I think that for posterity purposes is this Cimarron family legends, and it was put together by families in 1978. And it has two stories about the Stiles in it. One was written by a great-granddaughter, Joyce Stanton, about George W. Stiles, and has some pictures. And another one was written by Maisie Cox Reed, and it was primarily about Grandpa Lee Stiles, the deputy sheriff. And she also taught at Hillside School when we were talking about Mrs. Bateson and Mr. Bateson. And then one of the books that was actually written by George W. Stiles is the early days in the Saxon Fox country. Can you focus on that? And it's the Chronicles of Oklahoma, published by the Oklahoma Historical Society. And it tells about the run, a lot of detail, a lot of what we tried to talk about, but he does it in much more detail, and some of the people that were in the run, and the Sooners and the squatters, and some of the conflicts, and even scary moments.
Them Sooners have been a problem for a long time.
They've been a problem for a long time.
Well, I know the farm's been in the family for a long time. What do you envision the next 100 years for it?
I don't know. If the economy doesn't change, it's going to really be tough. We have pretty much quit the actual farming as far as working massive amounts of ground. We used to work over 200 acres of ground every year and plant wheat. Basically, we used it for hay. Now we've pretty much changed all that and put it to grass and hope to increase the size of the cow herd enough to hopefully someday pay off the debt. Not sure we're going to do that in our lifetime, but we're working at it. And the only ground we're actually going to till and farm now is about probably 80, 90 acres of rented ground. 2 different places, and we'll probably continue to till and plant a crop there, but there again, most of it will be, or it'll all be livestock feed. If we make a crop, it'll be, one of them will be pastured out, and the other will be baled, and then, well, that same place right now, we've got cattle running in it, because after we baled the hay, we had a good stand of crabgrass, so we moved some cattle on it. But most of it will be, at least in the near future, a cow-calf operation. We've got purebred Angus, we've got purebred Simmental, and we also, the largest amount of the livestock are commercial cows, Angus, Simmental cross, and 97, 98% black.
When we sold the dairy in 88 or 89, I always forget which year that was, Dad and Darrell talked a lot about, okay, how am I going to survive now? You know, what's going to be my livelihood? And they found some cattle up in Kansas and decided to have a beef cattle operation. And so that's how we got into the cow-calf operation. And it started with the Angus, I guess, buying half Angus, and they were Angus Hereford cross.
We had a beef cow herd started long before that, because we had bred
a few.
We had always bred the heifers to an Angus bull, so we had a Holstein Angus cross black female, and we had a pretty good number of those, and then obviously needed larger numbers, so we bought 63 head out of limestone country up in Kansas, at Cassidy, Kansas, and 43 of them, I think, were purebred Angus, and the other amount was Hereford Angus crosses Baldies. And then we used Simmental bull on those, and for several years.
And in the 60s, Darrell had started a Simmental herd.
In 1968, the Simmental got to be kind of big in this country. They started getting popular, and they had 4 bulls that they had transported into the United States from Switzerland, and the semen was available from 2 private bull studs. Curtis Breeding Service was in business, and ABS was in business, and then they had 2 bulls available through what they called the co-op bull studs. And I was working for the Kansas Artificial Breeding Service Unit at Manhattan that was owned by Kansas State University. And myself and 3 other guys formed a little group to breed. We would make a deal with the cattle owners in Kansas, that we could convince that we'd breed them to Simmental bulls, and then give them a nickel above market price for the females. We got quite a few takers, and so that was in the fall of '69 when we got that done. No, we bred them in '68. In the fall of '68, and the cattle were born the next year, and then weaned in May, probably May of '70. So I left Kansas in the summer of '69, and then for my part of the group that we had formed, they sent me 10 head of heifers for the money that I had invested. And so I really had some of the real early half-blood Simmentals in the country. My membership number will not reflect that because I didn't join the association until I was ready to register calves out of those heifers. But I could have had a real early number as far as when I first got involved, because it was in 1968, and that's when they had formed it.
But you brought the first Simmentals into Oklahoma.
Yeah,
didn't you?
I think I probably had the first ones in the state of Oklahoma. And in those days, the color was predominantly red and white. And when I moved back from Cabs, we got to breeding some Holstein cows to Simmental bulls. We had predominantly purebred registered Holsteins, but we also, when we increased the herd, we bought quite a few great animals. And about a year or so after I moved back, or maybe before that, I started breeding all the grade cows to Simmental bulls. We also piddled around with Maine Anjou and Chianini. And first thing you know, we started getting some black ones, black and white ones. And we thought that was terrible in the very beginning. The first thing you know, then the black ones got real popular. But we had early on, with the upgrading in the Simmental program, made some big money in the beginning. Of course, we don't hit it that hard anymore, not that involved. We did start AIing some cows this year to pretty nice Simmental bull, but for several years I didn't hit that very hard. We still do a lot of natural service and got quite a few purebred Simmental, but we've got purebred Simmental, registered Simmental, registered Angus, and then the most of them are commercial cows, Angus Simmental cross.
I don't know how you keep up with it.
Well, it's a challenge. But Nancy's been doing all the bookwork since she moved back, and that helps a bunch. It drives me nuts if I had to do all the bookwork.
If you just tell me where they get moved and how many, but I'm usually there to help move, so I just kind of keep track of it.
So with that many, you almost need your own private vet.
Yeah, we spend quite a bit of that money.
He's a good friend. Good friend.
We've been lucky that way. The veterinary we was using before I ever left home was still here when I come home. And he wanted to get in the Simmental business, so I bred cows for him for a year or two, and then he trained himself to do his own. And that got pretty popular back in those days, owners doing their own animals. And but I actually helped him get in the Simmental business. And then a few years before when he retired, a few years before he got killed, we did a lot of Simmental things together. And then he sold out to another vet, and we've been really, really tight, close personal friends above and beyond the professional relationship. And so we've been blessed that way as far as veterinary service.
About how much would a bull cost? I have no clue. The one that one you're talking about, the line one.
It's relative, you know.
Varies
They,
a lot.
they're everything from 1,000 to 1,500 to 70 or 80,000. It depends on the bloodline, the confirmation, how much advertising you've done. Sometimes helps a bunch, sometimes it doesn't help any.
The reputation the herd has.
Yeah, a lot of different factors.
Well, you mentioned having an early number. Was that significant?
In the
No,
membership,
Not really.
just how long he had been associated with the cemetery.
I guess what I was trying to say, my association with the breed is not reflected from my membership number. My membership number is 1,638, but I actually had cattle that could have been probably a 50, 60 number if I'd have joined in the beginning. Because they formed the organization the same year we started buying semen and breeding cows, 1968.
40 years. Well, do you want to wrap it up and go for tour? You want to? Is there anything I haven't asked that we want to make sure we get on tape before we?
I don't know, but
switch
you better
gears?
not think of it, we'd be here forever.
Well, we may do a round two later at a different time. But yeah, if not, thanks for this. It's been great. We appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate your taking the interest and spending the time doing it.
Hopefully 100 years from now, people will look back and find it very interesting, and maybe family members even learn some things that they didn't know.
Well, hopefully, grandkids will still be sitting here.
They probably ain't gonna believe it anyway.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.